Viltrox just released the new 50mm f2 lens here for only $199. It's their latest addition to their lightweight and affordable Air series, and it's supposed to be the sharpest one yet, but to keep the price and weight low, they skipped premium materials and most fancy features that you would usually get with more pro lenses, which sounds like an acceptable compromise for me and probably for you as well. Let's start with the body of this lens, and there's actually not much to say because this lens is designed to be as minimalistic and lightweight as possible, weighing only 205 grams. So this one is made entirely out of plastic, except for the mount of course, because autofocus, and the only special feature it has is the USB-C port on the back for firmware upgrades. Quite nice to get that at this price point, but aside from that there are no other features, no aperture ring, no buttons, no weather sealing. It's just a simple lens. And I have to say I don't find that much of an issue because in my first few years of shooting video I also didn't use any lenses with such features. I just used the buttons and dials on my cameras to adjust everything, and of course I've been careful in the rain and it hasn't been a problem for me. Actually, I still remember saving up for my first prime lens. Every euro counted there, so price definitely played a bigger role for me back then than all the fancy features that you get with lenses like aperture rings and stuff. Aside from that, it comes with a 58mm filter thread, which is good because it keeps the lens small, but most of my other lenses are much bigger and I don't have step-down rings for that. That's why I can't use any ND filters with this lens, so no buttery motion blur in that intro. Don't judge me. Anyway, let's come to the image quality. Of course, I also use this lens in the real world a bit, shooting on my Sony a7C Mark II, and I can only say that it's a great combination because both the lens and camera are so light that you can barely feel them in your hands. It's definitely a great travel setup, and I think it would pair well with the 20mm f2.8 from Viltrox, which is priced similarly, so you could vlog on the 20mm and use the 50mm for B-roll. And image-wise, I like the shots I got with this lens overall. I noticed right away that it's pretty sharp in the in-focus area, and the bokeh also looks quite smooth. However, I do have to say that I felt like I didn't get that much depth with this lens. I don't know what it is, if it's micro contrast or something else, but with my more expensive lenses I get a slightly better or also rounder look, but like less digital a bit. But that could be because I didn't use a mist filter on this lens, which I usually do all the time, so I'm quite used to that look. So that's rather subjective, I can't even describe it properly, but it definitely looks much better than any kit lens, so it's definitely an upgrade for a very low price for the users I think are interested in this lens. A problem I oftentimes have when I want to go out shooting is that right before when I pack my bag I noticed that I forgot to charge my batteries, and there's also a new tool from Viltrox that they just released, which is a battery charger but battery powered, so essentially a power bank that's made for camera batteries. So you just put up to 2 batteries inside there and they get charged, which essentially solves the problem. So if you're just about to go out and you recognize the batteries are not charged or maybe half full only or so, just put them inside, throw it into your bag and they get charged while you're on the go. I think it's not expensive, so just have a look at it if you also have this problem sometimes, if you're as disorganized as I am, and it might solve your problem. Anyway, let's come back to the lens. That's everything about the real world shooting test essentially. You see the footage yourself, so you can judge it if you like it or not. I would say let's now go into the lab and see how this lens performs there. Let's start. That's how you say it in German language. Let's start with sharpness. This lens is pretty sharp in the center directly from f2, and it stays about as sharp until f5.6 before diffraction kicks in from f8, where it loses a bit of sharpness. It's nice to see because it means that you can essentially use this lens wide open under many conditions or stop it down just slightly even if you're shooting landscapes without any issues in terms of detail. I usually stop my lenses down to about f5.6 or f8 when I shoot landscapes, but with this lens you won't don't have to do that unless you need perfect sharpness in the edges, because there the lens performs a bit weaker than in the middle, but still very good. So the edges, as you can see here, are definitely a bit softer wide open at f2, but it's also not bad. I've seen worse, and it gets better until f5.6, where this lens reaches its peak sharpness. What's great about the corners is also that I don't notice any chromatic aberrations, which I found on many other lenses, and it also confirms what's coming next, which is the longitudinal chromatic aberration. Longitudinal chromatic aberrations, aka LOCA, are surprisingly well controlled on this lens. You have to crop in a lot to see just a little bit of them, and under normal conditions I would say they are not noticeable at all. That's something that surprised me a lot, because such affordable yet sharp lenses usually suffer quite a bit in this department. Next up is vignetting. We can definitely see a good amount of vignetting at f2. At f2.8 it already looks much better, and at f4 it's completely cleaned up. Considering that it's that small and has a pretty wide aperture, that's actually good performance. For the autofocus test, I had my A7C Mark II set to the standard autofocus settings, both sensitivity and speed to 3, and the lens performed really well, like tracking my face work perfectly, unless I ran fast toward the camera, and even then it did a good job overall. I just noticed that the focus was slightly behind my eyes, but considering that it's not a sports lens, it's perfectly acceptable. As long as you don't move super fast, that won't happen. What I found more important for video here was that it racked focus smoothly, so you don't get that stepping you often see in the background with cheaper lenses that use stepping motors. That's really important in my opinion. I also filmed a few monkeys using animal tracking, and the lens also did a great job tracking them. I think when it lost track, it was probably a camera issue, like the tracking indicator disappeared on the display, what usually means that the camera lost the monkey. I hate those monkeys. They always steal your stuff, and it looks like the goats there are learning from them.
You goats can stay here, you are pretty cool, but don't poo here please, it's all full of poo from you. Ah, no! Okay, I don't like goats as well. The goats learn from the monkeys, unfortunately. No, you should not eat my fucking pullover! My god! Oh.
So that was a dangerous place, full of monkeys and goats that want to steal your stuff. Anyway, let's come back to topic. It's pretty much what I expected autofocus wise from this lens, because from my experience, lightweight lenses like this one usually perform pretty well in terms of autofocus, simply because they don't have to move that much glass, so the motors work less than they would with heavy lenses. There's one more thing I want to mention when it comes to focus, which is the minimum focus distance on this lens. That is 51 centimeters, which I find a little long, because I would be able to use this lens for more different shots if I could get closer to things. 51 centimeters is definitely enough for portraits and lots of other stuff, especially for travel, but I do sometimes wish I could get a bit closer. And if you want to shoot videos with this lens, focus breathing might also be important to you. And in this aspect, this lens is also one of the better ones. There is a bit of focus breathing noticeable, but it's definitely on the lower side and therefore a decent video lens. Okay, let's talk about flaring. When it comes to flaring, some people might find the ring you get when the light is positioned in the center of the frame a bit distracting, but that only appears if the light source is perfectly in the center. That doesn't happen that often. There's also a pretty strong flare towards the edges, which seems to take on the form of the light, and a few lighter ones that are not that distracting, but I personally don't find them very problematic, because as I've mentioned before in other videos, I'm generally a fan of lens flares. So for flaring, I would give it an average performance. Some flares can be a bit distracting at certain angles, but in most cases you would be fine with this lens. And finally, a bokeh. I already mentioned in my real world testing that the bokeh is quite smooth, and for most shooting scenarios that's the most important thing. But let's also look at some night footage, because we can really see the bokeh balls there, and they are perfectly round in the middle and become a bit cat-eye shaped towards the edges like it usually is. They also have a bit of texture to them, some onion ringing is definitely going on, and very bright bokeh balls also show a bit of fringing around the edges. Must say I personally like the fringing, as it gives the bokeh balls an interesting touch, but that's more like a personal taste. So who should get the this lens. I think if you're just starting out and you only have a kit lens, or you are looking for your first prime lens to improve your image quality, this is definitely a lens to consider if you don't want to spend too much money. Also, if you already have a couple of lenses but don't own a nifty 50 yet, this could actually be a great addition. I must say I'm actually in this situation. So far I didn't feel like I needed a 50mm lens, but I've definitely had situations where I wished I had one, and now that Viltrox sent me this lens, it already came in handy. For example, I used it on my overhead rig for a shot where I couldn't use my Fujifilm X-M5, and that worked perfectly because together with the A7C Mark II, it's super lightweight and I can't have a heavy setup on that rig. Honestly, I didn't expect to keep this lens, but now after testing it and using it for that overhead rig, I definitely will. So while it's certainly not my favorite lens in terms of depth or whatever it is, I don't know, I do think you will be very happy with this lens if you want something small and light that gives you a decent amount of bokeh and keeps your bank account full, or maybe you're just like me and can't stop switching between cameras and setups, then something like this can be a real lifesaver. And remember, upgrading your lens can often make a bigger difference than upgrading your camera body. So before spending on a new camera, consider trying out a lens like this first. I recently made a video with all the gear I use to make my YouTube videos, including my lenses. So if you want to get some ideas, check it out. You will find it here in the corner. And let me know your favorite tiny lens in the comments. It's always good to know what's out there.